The role-playing game, a rich and bountiful genre of video games that inserts you as the player into the fictions and fantasies of your favorite world, with lines of dialogue and numbers of statistics and probabilities as the backbone. The possibilities of RPGs are endless. You can be a child turning a decade old, excited to journey across the world while capturing and training magical creatures with seemingly infinite abilities. You can be a super soldier that has to save the world from an evil angel with only one wing. You can be a teenager that spends his free time on an island by the beach and is given a key of destiny that changes his worlds forever. These situations will either win you over with their complexity or dismiss your attention with their unoriginality. This is where RPG cliches take root. The more RPGs you play, the more prevalent and obvious they become. And depending on how many you've played, and for how long you've been playing them, these tropes will wear on you. That's what makes Undertale such a special gem. It breaks so many of these cliches or sidesteps around them with its quirky humor, that anyone playing Undertale will fall in love with its winning charm. Undertale is an RPG that, outside of some of the artistic choices, was mostly developed by Toby Fox. It is an indie title that originally released in 2005 for PCs, and has since been ported to other consoles, such as the PS4 and Nintendo Switch. For the sake of this review, I will be focusing on the Steam/PC version. The other versions don't really add anything new, save for a trophy system and/or an optional boss. Anyway, Undertale draws the core of its inspiration from Nintendo's Earthbound franchise. Hell, Toby Fox was known for creating a Halloween ROM hack of Earthbound back in 2008. One of the songs in that ROM hack is even a pivotal track in one of Undertale's most important chapters, but more on that later. Actually, it's quite surprising that Nintendo allowed Toby Fox to port Undertale on the Nintendo Switch, among other immortalizing things. The key tagline for Undertale is that it is the friendly RPG where nobody has to die. This one sentence does a few critical things for Undertale that immediately sets it apart from the norm. Nobody dying automatically implies that there are alternatives to killing your enemies. Normally in RPGs, enemies take on various forms, from humans to monsters and everything in between. In some RPGs, you can capture your enemies to make them your own, or use the loot they drop to make new equipment. But in Undertale, it is beneficial as the player to spare and understand the monsters that you encounter. As a result, you develop a connection to these characters by learning how to overcome them without raising a hand and senseless violence. And that's why Undertale is a critically acclaimed gem. That's what elevates this game from indie RPG to cult classic. The element of choice, where even the smallest actions have fascinating pathways open up or close to the player. Choice is the key that unlocks your investment and draws in your attention. And in Undertale, your choices will end in two ways: pacifist and genocide. Undertale isn't exactly an action RPG, so you won't find your character performing dazzling combos with flashy weapons on dynamic enemies. Undertale is a turn-based RPG, where you take a turn of action, then the enemy, and repeat. But as Ben Yahtzee-Crosaw of Zero Punctuation said about Undertale's combat system, it manages to hybridize turn-based and live combat elements in a way that actually fucking works. That's because Undertale takes a different route with its combat. When an enemy attacks you, or you interact with the enemy in a specific way, evasion or offense centers around bullet hell mechanics. And through these mechanics, characteristics of the enemy you're fighting are highlighted. Your opponents can fight you with fire, or bones, or friendliness pellets, disguised as bullets, with swords and spears and magic spells. But for certain bosses, these attacks are often highlighted by a different color. For example, before fighting Papyrus, you're instructed to keep your guard for his fabled blue attack. And before that, an enemy uses a blue attack towards you. To make a long story short, Sans tells you to treat blue attacks like blue stop signs. Basically, don't move, and you'll remain unharmed. God, I wish that worked against Yozora. There are several colored attacks and tactics to combat this throughout Undertale, from Undyne's green to Metaton's yellow to Muffet's purple. Each one radically changes the way you fight these characters, while simultaneously showing off their characters through their attacks. Isn't that all so much better than just pressing a button and having your character attack? That's because acting and sparing are vital for Undertale's best ending. Fighting is cast aside, except in one instance, unless you seek certain answers to the story. But that particular chapter is bookmarked for those who want to have a bad time. Ugh, these graphics, though stylized to make them distinctive, aren't exactly jaw-dropping or breathtaking. They get the job done, if this game came out for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or even the Nintendo 64. Seems fitting, given that the Earthbound franchise has titles on those consoles. Don't get me wrong, these graphics aren't terrible. It's actually rather impressive what this game is able to accomplish from an emotional standpoint, with only a grid of pixels for a face. Certain characters create a cacophony of countenances that creatively convey circumstances. Try saying that 3 times fast. But there's still some ugliness to them. The feet design of Toriel and Asgore look wrong, certain enemies move like puppets tangled in strings, other enemies have moments where they appear and you can actually see their hidden joints. Even the main protagonist, the character you look at the most, is graphically challenged. I never thought a character could have a worse walk cycle than the Pokemon trainer in Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. Still, the sprite animation works for most characters, and bleeding edge graphics and facial animations don't make for a great game with an equally great storyline. This game will still make you cry and laugh with the best of them, because what it lacks in graphics, it doubles down on in practically every other category. Whether you're familiar with Undertale or not, you should be familiar with the now infamous track called Megalovania, a track that originated in Toby Fox's Earthbound ROM hack, now a theme to one of the most difficult boss fights in Undertale, now immortalized in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate alongside Sans the Skeleton, as a Mii Fighter skin. And that game is currently the best-selling fighting game ever. Anyway, the music of Undertale. It's virtually masterful for this game. Most musical pieces do a brilliant job in setting the tone of the situation. The themes that represent many of Undertale's characters feel tailor-made for them, like a pair of clothing that only they can wear. It gets to the point where if you listen to the track by itself, you'll likely picture the character that it belongs to. And there's also a broad variety of musical styles to these tracks. The Russian dance of Bone Trestle, the persistence of Spear of Justice, the creepy crawly spider dance, the disco inferno of Death by Glamour, the trolling lunacy of Dog Song, the underground lore of Waterfall, the sheer terror of your best nightmare, the heroic stand of Hopes and Dreams. You get the point, right? 101 tracks that belong in everyone's collection of video game media. Are there flaws to this soundtrack? Yes, though they're nitpicky at best. There's an aura of inconsistency throughout the game with the music. It feels as though it can't decide between chiptunes and instrumentals. Also, a good portion of the music feels recycled, some obvious and others if you speed up and slow down certain tracks. Then again, what video game doesn't do that? There's nothing wrong with recycling music as long as you change the style completely, and Toby Fox does a brilliant job of this. Impressive for a self-taught musician whose hard work was noticed by Nintendo. That's how he's composed music tracks for other video games, such as Pokemon Sword and Shield. No wonder there are so many fan-made albums celebrating Undertale's music. If you're at this point of my review, then you don't mind minor spoilers to a game that came out in 2015, but from here on out, I will be dropping major spoilers as I break down the story of Undertale, and I'll give you the abridged and body version. Here goes nothing. The game begins with you as an androgynous child taking a trip and having a nice fall into the underground. For our identity's sake, this child will be named Pans, short for pansexual. More on that later. In your new quest to leave the underground, you encounter a satanic little stamen named Flowey, who hungers for your soul. After avoiding the pollen that Flowey the flower spreads because allergies, Toriel the goat mom comes in for the rescue. She's the caretaker of the ruins, and she rules with an iron glare.
Not up in here!
It's at this point that we learn 2 things about Pans. You can only speak via cellular phone, and you have a thing for gilfs. Goats I like to fuck. Anyway, the living tutorial teaches you about painfully easy puzzles and attempts to discover your weaknesses through allergies to either butterscotch or cinnamon. She leaves you alone to prepare her meal for you in an attempt to fatten you up before she devours you herself. And don't think that she won't, I've seen the vor art. Motivated by the thought of eating her fluffy buns, you proceed through the ruins. Pans encounters a ghost born from the tears of sadness from inside out, a ghost that was bested with a single smooch. Once at Toriel's house, she exercises her kidnapping acumen by putting you to bed, where you're voluntarily forced to eat a slice of her delicious pie. After having your fill, and after learning of Toriel's snail fetish, Pans grows bored of the gilf and attempts to leave the ruins, only for Toriel to kill you in fire. Reborn from the ashes, Pans escapes from the ruins, only to encounter a polarizing skeleton heavily armed with bad puns and sage advice. Sans the skeleton has a brother named Papyrus, the dead remains of Skeletor from He-Man. Together, they attempt to break your sanity with agonizingly simple puzzles, half of which Papyrus would blunder, but by pleasuring several white dogs that have probably ended up underground because the ASPCA threw them down here, you retain your composure, even in the face of weaponized cuteness. The same can't be said for Papyrus. In one last-ditch effort, he attempts to break you by dating you, but because of your uncontrollable libido, the date exceeds expectations and you get his phone number. Sans tries to score with you as well, but you're put off by his rampant alcoholism of finely aged ketchup. Pan's journey takes him to Waterfall, where the underground police catch up to you. Papyrus sells you out and you run for your life from a demented fish lady in armor. On the run, you manage to steal from some stupid sellers by convincing them that your trash should be their treasure. You try to acquire a Dragon Ball, but a dog shoves it up its ass. You make friends with a double amputee and even save his life in front of the fish sheriff. But alas, Undyne corners you, and rather than imprison you, she allows you to fall to your death. Reincarnated by the very thing that you're most allergic to, you wash off the pollen in the waters of the garbage dump, and punch a dummy to help regain the feeling in your hands. The dummy is offended by your crude handwriting, but dummies can't talk, dummy. You reach the area where Toriel does her sex store shopping, and eventually clash with Undyne again. She suplexes a boulder just because she can, but she never bothers attacking you with it. Instead, she passes out from the sheer strength of her super aquatic feet. Vulnerable, you attempt to drown her, but forget that she's a fish, giving her the chance to retreat. But thanks to Papyrus, you track her down to her residence. Together, you both formulate a plan to kill Undyne. With the explosives set inside the house, you both escape through the window, letting the house burn and all who inhabit it. Back at Hotland, Pans enters a laboratory where Dr. Alphys has been monitoring your every move, and every action. She plans on blackmailing you if you refuse to comply with her demands. And those demands are to kill Michael Jackson's robot double, watch prissy anime with her, and wash her life-size sex doll. Oh no wait, that's only in the Nintendo Switch version. Look at that face. That's a face that wishes it was in Rainbow Dash's place in that jar. As you hunt down this smooth criminal, you make your way across Hotland, solving slightly less easy puzzles to proceed onward. Along came a spider that served you some cider, scaring you away, and after a Final Fantasy VI reference, and a puzzle that no one will solve without reference, you pass through a motel and reach the core. What? Sans tells you that you'd be dead where you stand? You've already shut that memory out. Anyway, the core contains Metaton's backup dancers and bodyguards, because you know someone that averages 10 viewers on live streams needs 24/7 security. It proves fruitless, however, as Metaton gets into a dance-off with you, but consecutive heart shots via phone taser somehow turn him into a quadriplegic. Successful in Dr. Alphys' request, you begin to make your way into the underground exit. On the way to the capital, where the barrier keeping the monsters locked away, Alphys gives you a cruel ultimatum. To get through the barrier, you have to use a human soul and a monster soul. In other words, you have to kill King Asgore Dreamer. Hey, he had it coming. His last name is an anagram for murderer. The only problem is that Flowey the opportunistic flower steals your kill and then gets a crazy idea that fusing your human soul and the 6 other souls that Asgore already had in his possession will make him a god. He's aiming too high. He should be made into Jesus because Photoshop Flowey clearly needs Jesus. Regardless, the souls betray Flowey, returning him back to normal. You kill him with kindness, and he runs away with his apparent feat. You manage to pass through the barrier, your final message coming from the friends you've made in the underground, vowing to find their own way out. Apparently, Flowey manages to follow you and tells you of a better ending. Through the power of video game time travel, you return to before your fight with Asgore and back to Snowdin, where Undyne wants you to deliver an anonymous booty call to Alphys. Problem is, Alphys assumes that you're craving her cloaca caviar and goes on a date with you. At the garbage dump. One hilarious roleplay session where you pretend to be Undyne later, the real Undyne appears to capitalize on your actions that softened up the royal scientist. Papyrus even joins the party, turning this into an interspecies foursome. Afterward, Papyrus calls you to check on Alphys in her lab. You find a note by her bathroom, explaining that she's been harboring tremendous guilt to the point of debating suicide. Naturally, you try to find her in the True Lab, only to encounter several amalgamations. One in particular... Oh, phew. I thought that one was a pedophile. Eventually, the monsters corner you, believing you have their stash of medicinal marijuana because you smell like flower pollen. Alphys comes to the rescue by tending to their munchies, then tells you that suicide is the coward's way out. Grateful that she's gained a newfound confidence, you exit the True Lab via elevator, only to get a threatening spam call that somehow screws with the elevator you're in. Back in the capital, with all too familiar vines blocking the way back, you proceed forward to face your destiny again. The only difference is that Asgore pulls a Flowey as Toriel finally returns. Wonder if she realizes that she's got a couple hundred missed calls from Pans, and a few dozen dirty voicemails. Once the gang comes back together, Flowey capitalizes on everyone's stupidity and claims all of their souls. He transforms into a kid that then transforms into the god of hyperdeath, Asriel Dreamer. That's an anagram for serial murderer. No wonder monsters were sealed away underground. Through the power of your hopes and dreams, you save the lost souls and make a god cry. He returns to normal, shatters the barrier, and receives a pity hug. It's also revealed that the Pans that we think we're playing as isn't exactly Pans. Turns out, the human we're playing as is named Frisk. That's just a little bit better. With everything back to normal, the Sexual Seven leave the underground, thankful that there are no vampires in their ranks. You become the ambassador of monsters and stay with your goat mom and friends, before walking away into the dawn of a new and bright future. But like a coin, there are two sides to every story, for this was only the pacifist path. The other side of this coin has you killing every single thing that breathes. This is the genocide route. For the most part, the genocide route reflects how playing an RPG the normal way is the wrong way in Undertale. Mindlessly attacking monsters until nobody comes will give you EXP. What's EXP? It stands for Execution Points. What does love stand for then? It stands for Level of Violence. Kinda stretching the second one, but we'll kill Sans for that later. Because before that, the only character that puts up a fight against your warpath is Undyne, who determines herself to become Undyne the Undying. She melts from the strain as if she were in Hotland before dying. With little resistance, you eventually make your way to the capital, where Flowey the Flower recognizes you as Chara, and the two of you resume your plan to end this world. And after calling out the pansies that don't have the balls to do a genocide run themselves, you put the fear of God into him. Flowey panics and flees before you could play Loves Me Not with his face. And as for Sans, he claims to know about different timelines and that there's an external force that is going down this timeline, just to see where it leads. He's the most difficult boss you'll fight in Undertale, because of the way that he turns your sins against you with his bone attacks. But through sheer determination, you mortally wound him and watch him bleed to death. Or maybe that's just catch-up. All that's left is Asgore, and if you've been paying enough attention to your character, you'll realize that they seem to have a mind of their own. Asgore dies, but by Flowey's finishing blow. Then, after feeling genuine grief, Flowey dies. Rather morbidly, actually. before Chara appears with the desire to end the world after being awakened by your actions. But you refuse, and Chara jump scares you to death, while also showing the general review scores for Undertale. Still with me? We're almost done with this review. Just about each and every major character in this game has their shining moments, their personality developments, their funny moments, and their heartfelt moments. Undertale does a solid job in giving each of the primary 6 characters their time in the spotlight. Toriel starts off as a sweet grandmother character who makes it clear that she just wants you to be safe because you're not the first human to fall into the underground. And every other human that has fallen down here have left the ruins, only to die. The weapons and armor that you find lying around the overworld, or are able to purchase, are proof of that. In the end, she does what's best for you and lets you go, giving you a heartwarming hug before you leave. But it's clear by the end of the game that she's been following you. Sans is a bit more of a complicated character. In the Pacifist run, he's a pun-loving prankster who watches over you because Toriel made him promise her not to kill you. He'll even judge you before your fight against Asgore Dreamer. But in the Genocide run, he makes it clear that he pays attention to timelines changing, which is basically the player resetting the game, and is the last line of defense. He also sounds like Patrick Star from SpongeBob SquarePants.
Maybe it's the way you're dressed. Maybe.
Papyrus is Sans' brother, and is probably one of the most cheerful characters in the game. He's a sentry, like Sans, with dreams of being in the Royal Guard. He's self-centered, enjoys making puzzles, and cooks spaghetti. And as you continue to play his games, you can see that his bond with you grows, to the point where he puts your friendship over his dreams of glory. He even tries, but comically fails, to protect you against Undyne. Undyne herself is an explosive character, to say the least. But that's before you see her face. Before that, she seems like your run-of-the-mill knight in shining armor, hunting you down until you're cornered. She thinks of you as the bane of monsters' hopes and dreams. But her personality becomes clear when she takes off her helmet, and after saving her, you're given the opportunity to befriend her. Thanks to Papyrus, she treats this as a challenge, and when it becomes clear that you don't want to hurt her when she challenges you, she's reminded of how Asgore treated her and becomes your friend. Dr. Alphys is Asgore's royal scientist, but not his first. In the background, she's been ordered by Asgore to attempt to give monsters determination, in an attempt to escape the underground, only to have those monsters melt into themselves. She doesn't show this guilt yet, but it does weigh heavily on her over time. She's basically a shy otaku hermit with a crush for Undyne. And en route to the pacifist ending, she overcomes her guilt and knows that her friends will back her up as she corrects her actions. Mettaton is her creation, though he'll tell everyone that it was his idea. He was originally a ghost that was friends with Napstablook, which is made evident from the key that you can buy from Bratty and Caddy that unlocks the house next to the spooky DJ. He rose to stardom and is probably the most egomaniacally flamboyant character you'll ever see. He wishes for his big break in the human world, but through his battle with you, realizes that he's the only star that the underworld has. Asgore is the king of the underworld, husband to Toriel Dreamer, who was once queen but was disgusted by his actions and went into exile into the ruins. He's treated as a fluffy softie, but that facade disappears when you fight him. He just wants his family back, since he lost 2 sons, and then his wife by his questionable actions. He claimed 6 human souls, and needed your 7th to become God, and break the barrier. But we know where that plan goes. Flowey the Flower. This soulless seed of Satan is probably the most surprising character in Undertale. This seemingly sweet flower quickly makes it clear to you, if you get hit by his bullets, that he's out to kill you and everyone else. And through Sans and Papyrus, it's clear that Flowey is pulling strings. Flowey's true form is Asriel Dreamer, son of Asgore Dreamer and Toriel Dreamer. Before he died and turned into a flower, he was an adorable little kid, both meanings of the word, that found the first fallen human, Chara. This human hated humanity, and his actions eventually left Asriel to turn to dust over the flowers. After Asriel breaks the barrier and a tearful moment is shared with Frisk, he sadly stays behind, as he'll eventually return to a flower. Chara. Honestly, fuck that kid. He can die. He can go to hell and he can die. As for everyone else, all the NPCs and enemies in this game are magnified in this game thanks to the fact that Undertale is the friendly RPG where nobody has to die. You'll feel a connection to them, no matter how minor and brief their appearances are. Hell, you can actually spend over an hour just talking to everyone before choosing to leave the underground once the barrier is broken. Last but not least, yourself. Frisk's present and future are made clear, but their past is left to the imagination. Was Frisk curious about the legend of Mount Ebott? Did Frisk trip, or were they tripped into the underground? Did they have a family before this? Or did they have nothing except for a life that they wanted to see fall into the darkness? Alongside the two main sides to Undertale, Pacifist and Genocide, there's also a hard mode. Sadly, it's mostly a joke that gives you its punchline after fighting Toriel. And in between is the neutral route. This route, depending on how many enemies and main characters you choose to kill, can give you up to 20 different endings after you beat the game. They range from any one of these characters becoming kings or queens, to even the annoying dog stepping into power. I'd enjoy tackling these different outcomes, but they're mostly unnecessary and for those who deeply enjoy this game and want to crack open all of its secrets. And there are a few secrets, such as Dr. Gaster, and even So Sorry. Also, interesting thing to note, if you do a genocide run and replay the game to do a pacifist run, there will be some tweaks made. One example is, after the credits roll and you're sleeping in bed as Toriel leaves you a slice of pie in your room, your character wakes up and reveals themselves to be Chara. To summarize, Undertale is a cult classic RPG that was developed by a self-taught musician. His passion and love for the game, and everyone who helped kickstart and assist in developing the game, have led to a creation that has inspired many other people to create their own wonders. Hell, have you seen how many fan games and fan-made albums there are of Undertale? I personally have never played any of them, though I'd be open to. And I actually do own several fan-made Undertale albums. My personal favorite is Fallen, an Undertale tribute. It's basically the Harmony of a Hunter of Undertale music. This game has changed the life of Toby Fox, gave us an unforgettable story with memorable characters, became a catalyst for art and music alike, and even got itself an eventual sequel, prequel, second installment in the form of Deltarune. But most importantly, it has made people from all over want to have sex with a fictional anthropomorphic goat mom.
Oh, like you never done that!